As the days went by, that quiet chill only grew, settling deeper between us. She was still there beside me, but it felt like she was slipping away, inch by inch, in ways so small they were almost invisible. She'd pull away a little sooner when I reached for her hand. Her laughter, once easy and familiar, now seemed restrained, as if it cost her something to bring it out. Then there were the late nights with her phone. She'd spend hours scrolling, her screen lighting up her face in the dim room, her expression closed off and distant. I'd ask her how her day went, and her answers grew shorter, more clipped, as if each word she shared with me was something she couldn't get back. One night, I watched her from across the room, feeling like an outsider in my own home, wondering when this gap had formed, and why. The more I thought about it, the harder it was to remember the last time she looked at me the way she used to. So I asked again, even though I dreaded the answer. "Amanda, are we okay?" She barely glanced up, her fingers pausing over her phone for a split second. "Of course," she said, too quickly. "I'm just tired." But that excuse, that simple word, tired, had become like a wall she put up, a word to shut me out. Tired. It had turned into her all-purpose excuse, tired when she didn't want to talk, tired when she'd skip our usual Friday night dinners, tired when she turned away as I reached for her in bed. But I wasn't buying it anymore. Something else was going on, something deeper, and I was determined to find out what it was. "Maybe you need a break," I suggested, trying to keep it casual. "Why don't you go on a weekend trip with one of your friends? Get a little space and relax." She looked up, her surprise showing for a second. "A trip? I don't know, work's been so busy." "Come on, Amanda, you deserve it. I'll handle things here. Just go, have a good time. It'll be good for you." She looked at me for a long moment, like she was searching for a reason behind my words, but finally, she nodded. "Okay, maybe you're right. I could use some time away." The second she agreed, a plan started to take shape in my head. I'd send her off, give her the distance she seemed to be craving, and then I'd follow her. If my suspicions turned out wrong, I'd only have a little guilt to deal with for doubting her. But if I was right, I needed to see it with my own eyes. The next morning, I booked her a flight to a small seaside resort she'd always adored but rarely visited. "Why don't you take Emily and Rachel with you?" I suggested, mentioning her two closest friends. "Make it a girls' weekend." She hesitated for a second, then nodded, a faint look of relief crossing her face as she sent a message to her friends. That evening, after she'd left, I packed a small bag, being careful to leave anything behind that might give away my plan. I didn't want her knowing I was coming. I didn't want her to have the chance to cover her tracks if I was right about her. The following day, I made it to the same resort, keeping myself as inconspicuous as possible. The town was quaint, nestled between rolling hills and the calm, blue sea. I found a small hotel on the edge of town, far enough from where she was staying, and settled in to wait. That evening, I saw her. She was seated in the hotel's restaurant, exactly where I'd expected, but she wasn't alone. My heart pounded as I spotted him, a guy I'd never seen, sitting beside her on one of those plush velvet sofas. They were chatting, even laughing, and the way she looked at him, it was a look I hadn't seen in her for a long time. There was desire in her eyes, maybe even a spark of affection. The cool, distant Amanda I'd known these last months was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. I forced myself to keep it together, blending into the background as I moved closer. They didn't notice me, they were too wrapped up in each other, lost in their own world. My fists clenched as I watched him lean in, his hand disappearing under the table, slipping out of view. A breath hitched in my throat as the truth hit me. Her expression, the way her body tightened and then melted, it left no room for doubt. He was touching her, satisfying her, right there in the middle of the restaurant, where anyone could see if they just took a moment to notice. But no one did. They were in their own world, oblivious to everything around them. I wanted to march over, grab him away from her, and demand an explanation, but I stopped myself. I couldn't, not yet. I needed to see how far she was willing to go, how deep this betrayal ran. So I stayed hidden, watching as they finished their meal, as they walked out of the restaurant together, his arm around her waist, leading her like they were a couple. I trailed them, keeping a safe distance as they walked down a dim path toward her hotel. They were laughing, their voices carrying through the quiet night air. A rush of anger hit me, a primal urge to confront them, to put an end to this act. But I held back. I needed to see where they were headed, what was going to happen next. When they arrived at her room, she turned to him, placing a hand on his chest. He leaned in and kissed her, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she drew him closer, her fingers sliding into his hair as she deepened the kiss. That was it. That was all the proof I needed. She was cheating on me, betraying me with this stranger, and she didn't care who might see. My anger reached a breaking point, but instead of charging at them, I turned and walked back to my hotel. I needed to clear my head, to plan my next move. Confronting them now, while everything was boiling over, would get me nowhere. No, I'd make her pay in a way she'd never forget. I'd destroy her life just like she had destroyed mine. But I'd do it carefully, methodically. I'd make sure she had no way out, no chance to undo any of it. And as for him, well, he wouldn't get off easy, either. He had taken what was mine, desecrated my marriage, and for that, he'd pay. I didn't know who he was yet, but I'd find out, and when I did, he'd go down just as hard as she would. I spent the rest of the night in my hotel room, plotting, mapping out every possible way I could make them both regret this. My anger had become a cold, controlled thing now, no longer the fierce rage from earlier. I was calm, focused, ready. The next morning, I checked out of the hotel, leaving town without a word. I'd seen everything I needed to see. I knew exactly what had to be done. As I drove along the coast, the ocean stretching out beside me, a strange calm came over me. The worst part was over, I'd faced the truth, and now it was time to act. Amanda and her lover thought they'd won, thought they'd gotten away with their betrayal. But they had no idea what was coming, no clue how their lives were about to change. And I couldn't wait to watch it all unfold. Back home, the morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting a warm glow across the kitchen, but there was nothing warm left inside me. The drive back from the resort had been long, too long, giving me too much time to stew in my anger, letting it settle in deeper. But now, standing in the stillness of my own house, it all felt surreal, like maybe what I'd witnessed the night before had just been some kind of nightmare. I wasn't sure how long I'd been standing there, staring at the kitchen table, my mind replaying every little detail of Amanda and that man over and over again. The buzz of my phone on the counter broke me out of my trance. I picked it up, half expecting it to be Amanda, but instead, it was a message from my friend, Paul. "Hey, man, haven't heard from you in a bit. Everything good?" Paul has been my best friend since college, the guy who's been there through every high and low. We don't talk every day, but whenever we do, it feels like we just pick up where we left off. I stared at his message for a moment before replying, "Could use a drink. You free?" His response came back right away. "Always. My place?" "Yeah. Be there in 30. I tossed my phone onto the counter, grabbed my keys, and headed out. I needed to talk to someone, needed to escape this house that suddenly felt hollow, filled with memories of a life that now seemed like a lie. Paul lives in a small apartment downtown, a bachelor pad he's kept since his last breakup. The building is old, with creaky floors and thin walls, but it fits him well. As I knocked on his door, I could hear the TV faintly through the wall. The door swung open, and Paul greeted me with a grin, his dark hair messy, a beer already in hand. "You look like hell," he said as his hello, stepping aside to let me in. "Feel like it too," I muttered, taking the beer he handed me and dropping down onto his worn leather couch. The room had that familiar blend of old pizza and the faint tang of beer, a smell that took me right back to our college days. Paul sat beside me, his face turning serious as he took a drink. "What's going on? You sounded off in your message." For a second, I wasn't sure where to even begin. How do you put into words that your wife, the woman you've loved and trusted for years, has been slipping away, sneaking around behind your back? How do you tell someone you've seen things you wish you hadn't? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I think Megan's cheating on me," I finally said, each word feeling heavy and almost unfamiliar. Paul's eyes widened in shock. "What? Are you sure?" I nodded, taking a long sip of my beer. "Caught her with some guy at a hotel. They were, let's just say, it was more than a friendly chat." Paul let out a low whistle, running a hand through his hair. "Damn, man. I'm sorry. So, what are you planning to do?" "That's the thing," I said, setting my bottle on the coffee table and leaning forward, elbows on my knees. "I'm not just going to sit back and let this happen. I want to make her pay. And him too." Paul's face darkened, his usual easygoing look replaced by a rare, serious expression. "Revenge, huh? Are you really sure that's the way to go? What else am I supposed to do, Paul?" I snapped, the frustration boiling over. "She's been lying to me, sneaking around, treating me like a fool. I need to do something that'll make them both regret getting involved with me." He sat quietly, studying me for a moment. "You've always been the steady one, Adam. Don't let this ruin you. But if you're serious about this, you need a plan." "That's why I came here," I admitted. "I need your help. You're good at this kind of thing." Paul raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smirk flickering across his face. "You're asking me to help you get back at your wife and her lover?" I nodded, meeting his gaze. "I can't do it alone." He leaned back, thinking. "All right, but we have to be smart about this. No reckless moves. You've got to be careful, not to dig yourself into a deeper mess." I took a deep breath, feeling a sliver of relief. "All right. So, where do we start?" Paul stood up, pacing the room as he considered the options. "First, you've got to find out who this guy is. We need to know everything about him, his job, his family, his weak points. If we're going to bring him down, we need to hit him where it'll hurt the most." "And Amanda?" I asked, my voice growing tense at just the mention of her name. "She'll get what's coming, don't worry," Paul reassured me. "But we need to be smart about this. If you act too fast, you're bound to slip up. You need to play the long game." I nodded, knowing he was right. "I'll start digging around, see what I can turn up. Maybe even hire a private investigator." Paul clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Good start. But remember, Adam, once you set foot on this path, there's no going back. Make sure you're ready for that." I met his gaze, feeling the anger bubbling just under the surface. "I am. I've never been more certain about anything in my life." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of planning and strategy. Paul suggested we begin by tracking Amanda's movements, combing through her phone records, and checking her emails. "She might be hiding something there," he said. "Something we can use." When I got home that evening, the house was quiet, still empty. Amanda wouldn't be back until the next day. I sat at the dining table, Paul's words echoing in my head. This was the point of no return, the moment where I'd decide to either let this anger consume me or walk away from it. I opened my laptop and logged into our shared email account. Amanda didn't know that I had her password, or maybe she didn't care. Either way, I started there. It didn't take long to find something. An email from someone named Justin, a name I didn't recognize. It was brief, just a few lines about meeting up and how much he missed her. My stomach turned as I read it, each word hitting me like a hammer. But it wasn't just the message itself that got to me, it was the tone. Familiar. Comfortable. This wasn't some recent fling. It had been going on for a while, long enough for them to act like it was perfectly normal. The thought made me sick. I scrolled further, uncovering more messages, each one cutting deeper. Plans for secret getaways, inside jokes, even photos, intimate moments she had shared with someone else. I saved every bit of it, creating a folder labeled Evidence on my desktop. It was a small act of control, a way to feel like I had some power in a situation that had stripped me of it. Later that night, as I lay in bed, the darkness pressed in around me, heavy and suffocating. I thought about Amanda, about how much I loved her, how much I still did, even now. That love, twisted and soured by her betrayal, was what fueled me. When she came home tomorrow, she'd have no clue that anything had changed. She'd have no idea I'd seen those messages or watched her with another man. But I'd know. And I'd be ready. I closed my eyes, a plan taking shape in my mind. I'd let her believe everything was normal, that I was still in the dark. I'd let her walk right into the trap, secure and unsuspecting. And when the time came, I'd pull the rug out from under her. She'd know exactly how wrong she was. As I drifted off, my anger settled into a cold, determined resolve. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and soon, Amanda and her lover would see just how far I was willing to go. When I heard the front door open the next morning, my heart skipped a beat. I sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee in front of me, pretending to scroll through my phone as if nothing was amiss. I could feel the tension tightening in my chest as Amanda's footsteps came closer, her suitcase wheels rolling across the hardwood floor. "Morning," she greeted, her voice light, almost cheerful. It was that same tone she'd had when we first met, the one that used to lift my spirits on the hardest days. But today, it only added fuel to the anger that simmered beneath my calm facade. "Morning," I replied, keeping my eyes on my phone. I took a sip of coffee, letting the bitterness steady me, holding back the words I wasn't ready to say. She walked into the kitchen, leaning against the counter, her gaze fixed on me. "I missed you," she said, but the words felt empty, as hollow as an old promise. "Missed you too," I lied, finally looking up. She was still strikingly beautiful, her long dark hair cascading over her shoulders, her eyes bright and attentive. But now I could see the lies lurking just beneath the surface, the deceit that had been there who knew how long. She moved closer, resting her hand lightly on my shoulder, her touch hesitant. "Everything all right?" she asked, her brows drawing together in what looked like concern. It was almost laughable, her asking if I was okay when she was the one unraveling our marriage behind my back. "Yeah, just a little tired," I replied, forcing a smile. "You know how it goes." She nodded, her concern fading as her usual easy smile returned. "I know exactly what you mean. The weekend was nice, but it's good to be home." I nodded, forcing down the bile that rose in my throat. "So, how was it?" I asked, aiming for a casual tone. "The trip?" "It was great," she said, going to the fridge and grabbing a bottle of water. "Emily and Rachel send their love. We did a lot of shopping, ate way too much, the usual." I nodded again, feigning interest, but inside, I was simmering. I knew she hadn't spent the whole weekend with her friends. I knew there was someone else. But I kept my cool, the mask firmly in place, letting her believe I didn't suspect a thing. "That sounds nice," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Maybe we should take a trip sometime soon. Just the two of us." She paused, the bottle halfway to her lips, and for a split second, I saw something flash in her eyes, maybe guilt, but it vanished quickly, replaced by a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, that sounds nice," she said, her voice just a little too upbeat, too rehearsed. The conversation faded after that, and she excused herself to unpack, leaving me alone in the kitchen with my thoughts. I stared at the empty doorway, my mind spinning. She was a good liar, I had to admit that. But I was better. I'd had to be, to keep it together this long without breaking down. I picked up my phone and texted Paul. She's back. We need to move forward. You free tonight? His reply was fast. Always. Same place? Yeah. 8 p.m. The rest of the day crawled by, each hour passing slowly as I kept up appearances. Amanda stayed busy unpacking, answering emails, and making phone calls. I caught glimpses of her from the corner of my eye, and every time, I reminded myself to stay calm, to keep the plan moving forward. Finally, 8 p.m. arrived, and I told Amanda I was going to grab a drink with Paul. She barely looked up from her laptop, just nodded and told me to have a good time. The ease with which she brushed me off stung, but I turned it into fuel for my resolve. When I reached Paul's apartment, he was waiting with a couple of beers on the table, his expression serious. He didn't waste any time on small talk and jumped straight in. "What did you find out?" he asked, handing me a beer. I took a long drink, letting the bitterness settle before I finally answered. "She's good. Lied to my face about the whole trip this morning. Told me she was with Emily and Rachel the entire time." Paul's expression hardened as he listened. "And what about the guy?" "I found some emails," I said, pulling out my phone and showing him the saved messages. "His name's Justin. No last name in the emails, but at least it's a lead." Paul scrolled through the messages, his eyes narrowing as he read. "Looks like this has been happening for a while. She's comfortable with him. Way too comfortable." "Exactly," I said, my jaw tightening. "Which means we have to be careful. If she's been doing this a while, she's probably pretty guarded. We can't afford to mess this up." Paul set the phone down, deep in thought. "We need to know more about this guy, where he works, his routine, what his life is like. The more we know, the better we can plan." "I was thinking about hiring a PI, I said, voicing the idea that had been running through my mind all day. Someone who can dig into his background without raising any suspicions. Paul nodded in agreement. "Smart move. I know a guy, real discreet, doesn't ask questions. I'll call him tomorrow." Relief washed over me at the thought. Having someone else involved, someone who could take some of the weight off my shoulders, made it feel a bit more manageable. "But keep in mind," Paul continued, his tone turning serious. "This is going to take some time. We're in this for the long haul. Don't rush it." "I know," I said, though the urge to confront Amanda and Justin was just below the surface, almost impossible to ignore. "But the sooner we get started, the better." Paul raised his beer, a small grin breaking through. "To getting even," he said, his tone softening just a bit. "To getting even," I echoed, tapping my bottle against his. For the next hour, we pored over the details, talking through every possible scenario, considering potential pitfalls. Paul was always good at this, seeing problems before they cropped up. It was one of the reasons I'd always trusted him, even during the worst times. As the night wore on, a strange mix of emotions filled me, anger, anticipation, even a dark excitement. The plan was coming together, and with each passing moment, I could see how it might all play out. But beneath it all, a quiet dread nagged at me, a whisper that once I went down this path, I'd be crossing a line I couldn't return from. I wasn't just setting her up to get caught, I was preparing to destroy her and the man she was with. Part of me questioned if I was ready for it, if I could handle the fallout of what I was planning. But then I thought of those emails, of how Amanda had looked at me earlier, the lies she'd been feeding me for who knew how long, and the anger blazed up again, swallowing any doubts. I was in too deep to back out now. There was no turning back. When I finally left Paul's apartment, the night air was cool and still, the city lights casting long shadows across the pavement. I drove home in silence, the plan we'd laid out replaying over and over in my mind. When I stepped through the front door, the house was dark, quiet. Amanda must have already gone to bed. I slipped off my shoes and headed upstairs, my steps softened by the carpet. In the bedroom, Amanda was lying on her side, her back to me, her breathing steady and deep. I stood there, just watching her, a tangle of anger, sadness, and something unnameable swirling inside me. Carefully, I climbed into bed, making sure not to wake her. The cool sheets pressed against my skin, and I closed my eyes, trying to calm the storm raging within me. But sleep was elusive. My mind churned, too unsettled, too full of revenge and betrayal to let me rest. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, knowing this was just the start. The first move had been made, the wheels were in motion. Before long, very soon, Amanda and Justin would realize just how much they'd underestimated me. But for now, I waited, letting my anger simmer, holding it steady. When the moment came, I'd be prepared. And they wouldn't see it coming. The days inched by, each one feeling heavier than the last, but the plan was unfolding. Paul's contact, the private investigator, was thorough, and within a week, I had everything I needed. Justin Wallace, mid-30s, recently divorced, working as a financial advisor downtown. He wasn't just a random fling, he was someone Amanda had been seeing for months, maybe even longer. The photos the PI provided were damning. There they were, laughing, holding hands, kissing in the parking lot outside his office. Each time I looked at those pictures, a raw fury surged inside me, nearly unbearable. But I pushed forward. This was what I'd asked for. I wanted proof, and now I had it. But it was the final piece that cemented their fate, a recording the PI managed to capture of a conversation in Justin's car. I played it late at night, alone in my study, hands shaking as I pressed play. "I can't keep doing this, Justin," Amanda's voice came through, soft and full of hesitation. "Lying to Adam every day, it's tearing me up. I don't know how much longer I can keep up this act." Justin's tone was calm, soothing even. "You don't have to keep pretending, Amanda. We've talked about this, you deserve happiness. We both do. Adam will understand, eventually. He'll move on, and so will you." There was a pause, then her shaky breathing filled the silence. "But what if he doesn't? What if he fights it? He's not going to let go, Justin. You don't know him like I do." Justin laughed, a low, confident chuckle that made my skin crawl. "He won't have a choice, Amanda. You're miserable, and you deserve better. We both do." I switched off the recording, feeling the room spinning. They were plotting to leave me, to walk away from the life we'd built without a shred of hesitation. The rage was intense, but beneath it was a sadness so deep it nearly choked me, a sense of loss that took the air right out of my lungs. This was it. The end of everything. And right then, I knew there was no going back. The next morning, I woke up early, the plan sharp and clear in my mind. I knew exactly what I had to do, and I was ready. Amanda was still asleep, her face peaceful, blissfully unaware of the storm coming her way. I went through my usual routine, acting as if everything was fine. I even kissed her cheek before heading out, the action so practiced, so ordinary, it almost felt real. But inside, I was simmering, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. At lunch, I met Paul at a small cafe near my office. We took a corner booth, the noise of the crowd a distant hum as I laid out the final steps of the plan. "I'm going to confront her tonight," I said, my voice steady and firm. "And I want you there." Paul's eyes widened for a second, but he didn't ask questions. "Are you sure about this, Adam? Once you confront her, there's no undoing it." "I know," I replied, clenching my fists on the table. "But I can't go on like this. I need to put an end to it." He nodded, his expression serious. "I'll be there. Whatever you need." That evening, I got home earlier than usual, the quiet of the house feeling almost unnatural. Amanda was in the living room, sitting with her laptop, and looked up as I walked in. "Hey," she greeted me with a smile, but there was something guarded in her eyes. "You're home early." "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile of my own. "Thought we could have dinner together. It's been a while." She hesitated, then nodded, closing her laptop. "That sounds nice. I'll go start something." "No need," I said, raising a hand to stop her. "I already ordered takeout. Should be here any minute." Her smile faltered, but she nodded again. "All right." We sat in the kitchen, the silence between us thick and uneasy. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes kept drifting to her phone, as if she were expecting a message. Finally, the doorbell rang, and I went to answer, my heart thudding in my chest. Paul stood there, a grim expression on his face, holding the takeout bags. He nodded at me before stepping inside, shutting the door quietly. Amanda's face shifted as she saw him, a mix of surprise and confusion. "Paul. What brings you here?" "I invited him," I said, placing the bags on the table. "Thought it'd be nice to have a friend join us." She blinked, forcing a smile, though unease flickered in her eyes. "Of course. The more, the merrier." We sat down to eat, the three of us, but the food might as well have been tasteless for all I could feel. The tension was thick, hanging heavy over the table. Amanda barely touched her food, her gaze flicking between Paul and me, clearly sensing that something was off. Finally, I couldn't hold back any longer. I put down my fork, my appetite gone, and looked straight at her. "Amanda," I said, my voice low and controlled. "We need to talk." She froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. "What's going on, Adam?" "I know," I said, my words steady but laced with anger. "I know about Justin. I know everything." Her face went pale, the color draining instantly. She set her fork down, her hands trembling. "Adam, I don't." I cut her off, raising my hand. "Don't lie to me. I've seen the emails. I've heard the recording. I know you've been cheating on me for months, maybe even longer." She stared at me, her eyes wide, mouth opening and closing as though struggling to find the right words. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Adam. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." "That's not good enough," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "You've been lying to me, sneaking around, and now you want me to just accept it? To forgive you?" Tears filled her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "I never wanted to hurt you. I haven't been happy. I'm not happy, and I didn't know how to tell you. So you just chose to betray me?" I snapped, the anger boiling over. "You decided to destroy everything we've built, just because you were unhappy." She flinched, the tears streaming freely now. "I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to fix it." "You didn't even try," I shouted, standing up from the table, fists clenched at my sides. "You didn't give me a chance. You just walked away." The room fell silent, the only sound the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. Paul sat nearby, his expression unreadable, quietly watching as the confrontation unfolded. Finally, Amanda spoke, her voice small and broken. "You're right. I didn't try. And I'm sorry. But, it's too late now, isn't it?" I stared at her, my heart pounding, the weight of her words pressing down on me. She was right. It was too late. Too much damage had been done, too much had been lost. There was no going back, no way to repair what was shattered. "I want a divorce," I said, the words spilling out before I could even think. But once they were out, I knew they were true. There was no other way forward. She stared at me, eyes wide, the tears still streaming down her face. "Adam, please." "No," I replied, shaking my head. "It's over, Amanda. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending we can fix this. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly, the sound tearing at the last threads of my heart. But I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage. Paul stood up, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder, his voice low. Come on, Adam. Let's go. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and followed him out of the house, leaving Amanda behind. As we stepped into the cool night air, a strange sense of relief washed over me, mingled with the overwhelming sadness that threatened to consume me. It's done, I said, more to myself than to Paul. It's really done. He nodded, his face somber. Yeah, it's done. We walked in silence, the weight of the night pressing down on both of us. I knew the road ahead would be long, filled with lawyers, paperwork, and the painful process of unraveling our lives from one another. But for now, I was just grateful it was over. The lies, the deception, the endless cycle of anger and betrayal, it was finally behind me. At the end of the street, I paused, turning back to look at the house that had once been my home. The lights were still on, but it felt like another world now, a world where I no longer belonged. I hate her, I murmured, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I hate her for what she did to us. Paul nodded, his hand still steady on my shoulder. I know, man. But you'll get through this. We'll get through this. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to turn away from the house, from the life I was leaving behind. Yeah, I said. We will. And with that, we walked away, swallowed up by the darkness, leaving the past firmly where it belonged, behind us.